Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of I Got Gameplay. I'm Michael Burhan here, your host of hosts, of course, having a journey home while we are actually associating ourselves with a man, the myth, the legend. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to all strap on your leisure suits, of course, because we have Al Lowe on the show tonight. Al, how are you doing?
Hi, Michael. Great. Now that we're finally rolling, I'm loving it.
No, tell me about it. We've had loads of technical difficulties today, guys, and if you're an avid follower of the show who's come on at 8 p.m. wanting to actually hear what we have to say, we do apologize. It's just Skype, and there's nothing else to say apart from Skype. But, of course, we also have with us the man who's been a featured guest on the show and has worked his way into a regular routine, Mr. Xander Scullion. Xander, how are you doing today, mate?
I'm doing really well. I'm just glad we got all this sorted out. Live television or podcasting.
When it goes live, there was a huge potential to fuck up.
Yeah, it happens.
Exactly. And speaking of fuck-ups, this man isn't one, of course. And he is the most amazing...
Well, that's
YouTuber
one of the worst segues I've ever heard.
I know, tell me about it. He is, of course, one half of Getting a Nerd On, and a gentleman who I find extremely funny because of his skits on the show. He is Mr. Zach Luthor. Hey, Zach.
What's up? How's it going?
Very good, very, very good. I'm traveling on my way home, getting a nice little lift here as well, so it's very nice. There's no sort of tons of car noises and buses like we had with the Mario show. So it's doing really well. Also, who's going to be joining us today? We're going to have JL76 himself, Mr. John Latimer, who'll be joining us in a little bit. Hopefully, Xander can add him onto the call with us as well. So I want to start at the moment with a bit of a Q&A. So I thought that the panel ourselves, like everybody on the show tonight, can actually ask Al a question because we want to get to know you a little bit, Al, of course.
Well, wait,
because you're the man behind.
Verification question, is it?
It's not an age verification question. You can be as dirty as you want on this show. Our humor is blue, so blue we could be called sepid. So, Al, let me ask you a little question myself, and it was one given to me by Richard Unlim himself, the man who owns this network and is a big part of it, Mr. Stephen Richards. He wanted to ask, how restricted were you when making Leisure Suit Larry? Were there certain things that you could say and couldn't say when making the game, or did they let you just go all out?
Well, Ken Williams was the publisher of, the president of Sierra, and that was my publisher. So he was the ultimate say in what went in the game. When we started, it was make it as dirty as you want to, Al. It'll be great. And the closer we got to shipping, it was, gosh, I don't know if we can do that or not. And but for the most part, he let through everything that I put in. I was more self-censoring than it was anything else, and mainly because I was trying to appeal to the widest audience possible. And you have to understand that at that time, games were sparkly white and clean. There was nothing ever. I was pushing the envelope pretty far to include the things that I did. So I didn't really try to push it farther than that. Later on in the games, when I was developing those, I would come up with ideas, and my typical test was I would yell across the house to my wife and say, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And if she'd say something, I'm hearing heavy breathing. Is that me?
I'm not.
Somebody needs to mute their mic.
Somebody.
If you're going to go to the toilet while I'm on, at least.
If someone's taking a whiz, then that's fine. It's called toilet humor for a reason.
Yeah. Anyway, so I guess my wife was my censor, because if I said, "What do you think of this?" and she went, "Oh, well," then I'd put it in. But if she went, "You can't say that," so then I'd leave it out. So that's how the game was.
So there was nothing involving two nuns and a priest then. So.
Well, if you know some of the jokes that are in the first Larry game, where Ken is at the bar and he only tells you punchlines to jokes, if you know any of those jokes, they're filthy.
Yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly, and it's actually so funny when playing that game. There was for me when I was like growing up, I was like this little awkward high schooler basically, and I'm playing this
unlike
game.
the rest of us.
Unlike the rest of you, you all were sort of cool, calm, and collect, you know. And with me, when I picked up this game, and it was actually by chance because I found it at a shop and I was looking for new PC games, and PC for me was like the newest thing in terms of gaming. And I picked up the game, I popped it in. We had the whole age verification thing, which I had to get around because I was like being a kid, I couldn't actually get around that age verification until like a couple of days. I was a bit.
Nobody told
child.
you about Alt X.
No. Eventually, I learned. But with that sort of thing, and then the play through the game and watching, like I think my first turn after I got Larry with the hooker, he ended up dying with a sexually transmitted disease, which I just found completely and utterly hilarious. And it was quite funny to go over those kind of boundaries in certain games, because nothing would bring you to that sort of level. And the humor in it was just, for me, growing up, because I have a very blue sense of humor, having that sort of thing, like just go straight to you and shove it right in your face, in a sense, just made me like crack up with laughter. So let's go on to Xander. Xander, do you have a question?
Yeah, I did, and this is it's going to be a weird question because obviously you're the man behind Leisure Suit Larry and like King's Quest, and but you actually have a music background, and I was wanting to ask you, was there any sort of like video game music that really sticks in your mind that you really enjoy?
You mean when I was doing music for the games? No.
Oh,
No, not really. Since then, sure, there's been a lot, but no. Back in the '80s, music was in a terrible state. It was almost anything that had at least three voices. It was almost all techno pop stuff, and it didn't appeal much to me. And I thought that a game that was funny should have some sort of a funny sounding theme song. The music should be funny. And that's why I came up with the Larry theme, because it's a goofy kind of song that you don't hear. It's not the standard fare.
Right.
Yeah,
now
it's a very different kind of song. Yeah, I've got a tom-tom in the car with me. We're going to be hearing her a couple of times. So with the Leisure Suit Larry theme, it was one of those things where when I first heard it, it just seemed very comedic in a sense, but now it's become like part of pop culture. I could play that song for anybody, and like anybody that I'm in the room with can actually sit there and go, I know that.
Yeah, it's amazing. If I had known that 25 years later people would still know of it and be talking about it, I would have spent more time writing it. I think it took me a total of 20 minutes one night before dinner. I was in a hurry and I knocked it out, in one evening. So,
speaking of knocking out in one evening, Zach, you got a question?
Yeah, I was going to ask what made you want to go, I guess, this route to like a comedy idea, and even more of a comedy idea, of like a dirty comedy idea. I mean, it's like when I think of a lot of the things happening back then, you look at like something like Custer's Revenge, that was it was like dirty, but like it was like a shitty game, and it was just shit. Like they only made it to be like oh, there's a dick in this game, so it's adults. But like yours has a lot of humor, but like intelligent humor in it. And I was wondering like what made you want to go down that road?
Well, I think a lot of people would argue with you about the intelligent part, but
well, for example, I think
my
Lefties
idea
is a genius name. Lefties is fucking hilarious. As soon as I saw that, I like lost it.
I think I always enjoyed the left-handed hammer. Yeah. Anyway, the idea was that back then Sierra was trying to stretch the medium. We felt, and when I say we, I mean primarily Ken Williams, of course, because he was the boss. Ken felt that all the games on the market were too similar, and he wanted to do something that wasn't on the market. He would actively pursue genres and types of games that didn't exist. And some of them didn't work, and some of them did. But I remember vividly one day we went to lunch and stopped at a video store, a videotape rental store. Remember those?
Oh, yeah.
And we were looking around the shelves, and there was a big shelf full of Western movies. And I said, how come there are no Western games? And he said, yeah, that's a good point. What, you want to do a Western game? And I said, well, I love Blazing Saddles. Maybe I could do a comedy Western. And so we did. I mean, I did Freddie Farkas' Frontier Pharmacist, simply based on a visit to a video store looking for genres that hadn't been done before.
Very cool.
And it all started, if I'm not mistaken, off with a text game called Soft Porn.
Yeah, Chuck Benton was a programmer, a professional programmer who was interested in using the Apple II for database management programs, and he wasn't sure that it was up to the task because he was used to working on mainframes and mini computers. And so he bought an Apple II, and he thought, I should write some kind of test case for this thing, and he liked playing adventure games, and so he wrote a silly little adventure game just to test the disk I/O speed and so forth and I guess he showed it to a few people, and when Ken found out about it, he said, God, that's great, let's publish it. And so it was the only game that Sierra ever published that didn't have graphics, but it was a text-only game. I believe it was 1981, and it was really dated. And in a couple of years, it sold tremendously at first because of the subject matter. But it was an odd game, and not a lot of people finished it. I mean, a lot more people bought it than finished it was what I was going to say. But I think even more so, a lot more people pirated it than bought it.
Oh yeah, it was so easy to pirate games back then.
So easy to pirate. You just hit Control-C while the game was loading, and then you could save it off to another disk. So at a time when Apple had sold 100,000 Apple IIs, Ken had sold 25,000 copies of Soft Porn, and everybody I knew had a pirated version. So it was probably on every Apple II on Earth back then. But when we obtained the rights to the Disney characters, Disney wasn't real wild about having Mickey in the same catalog with Soft Porn. So Ken dropped Soft Porn. And,
oh, no!
So Ken dropped Soft Porn, and we pursued the Disney license characters. And that proved to be a dead end for us because at that time, licensed games had a terrible stigma. And while we did, the Disney games that we did are good, and if anybody's interested, they're on my website, allowe.com. You can actually go download them and play them, for fun. They don't tell Disney, though, because they don't know that I'm...
Well, I think Disney will probably find out now. If you get a cease and desist, it's not our fault, Al. I'm
probably, yeah. Well, I tried. Anyway, go to allowe.com and download the games. But they were good games. But the problem was back then, licensed games had stigma attached to them, unlike now. And that's a big deal today. But anyway, I didn't finish my thought. So
sorry, Al. I do apologize.
After a couple of years, we gave up the rights to the Disney characters, and I was casting about for a new project. And the conversation consisted of something like, what do you want to do next? I don't care. What do you want me to do next, Ken? And he said, well, Soft Porn used to be a big seller. it was a big hit back when. Why don't you see if you can do something with that? We'll put graphics to it and make it in our modern new AGI interpreter. And I said, okay, I'll take a look at it. And I dug it out. I dug out my pirated version, I think, and played it through. And went back to Ken the next week, and he was having a meeting with a bunch of other guys. And I said, "Oh, Ken, this game is so out of date that it should be wearing a leisure suit." And I got a laugh. Everybody laughed. I said, the only way I could actually do this is if you allow me to make fun of it, if you let me make a comedy out of it. I think I could make people laugh at it. And that's how it came about. We were trying to find things to do that weren't being done, and at that time there were no games set in current day settings. Everything was sword and sandals or Save the Galaxy, space adventures and stuff, which anyway. Hasn't changed that much, I guess, but the chance to do a current day setting with more adult topics and with comedy.
Someone's trying to download the Disney games right now.
You know what I say? If someone downloads a Disney game, an angel gets its wings.
Yeah.
But yeah, no.
It was the right time to do something different.
Yeah. One thing I want to ask you, Al, is how much of your comedy goes into the games that you make?
I don't know what that question means.
Basically, you have your own sort of humor, you have your own sort of stylings in terms of the way that you make the way that your humor comes across.
Yeah, that's not really what happens.
What happened
was I had no fucking clue as to how to do a comedy. I had never written a comedy piece in my life. I had never done anything. I just kind of opened my mouth and said I would do it. And then I had to actually try and be funny. So my approach was, if I thought anything was funny, I threw it in there. From the dog pissing on your leg, if you stand still for 250 animation cycles, I think it is, something like that. Down to whatever, lefty having a left-handed hammer. There was just everything I could throw at it. So you can't really say that I put any style to it, because I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't. It was just whatever I could think of, I did. And to what extent that reflected my personality and my experiences, that's somebody's got to turn off their mic.
That's Burhan. Burhan's getting excited.
That's me. I'm running. I'm running into the house because there's loads of loads of sort of wind.
Okay.
It's not because I'm breaking wind. It's because of wind.
That's why you couldn't press mute.
Well, we also have someone that just joined in as well. John just jumped in. What's up, man?
Hi, thanks for having me on.
Definitely. And John, you weren't in here earlier when we were asking kind of the short Q&A for Al Lowe. Did you have a question you wanted to ask him?
Yeah, I do. I've thought of a couple. Yeah. First of all, it's a pleasure to speak to you, Al.
Well, likewise.
What I was going to ask was maybe a bit controversial, hopefully not, but what really happened to Leisure Suit Larry 4?
Well, the truth is that I thought there were only going to be 3 games. At that time, it wasn't unheard of to have a trilogy of books or a trilogy of movies. It was a little unusual to have a trilogy of games, but that was it. I'd never heard of anybody going past 3. So when we got to the 3rd one, I figured, well, I'll end this with an ending that ties up all the loose ends and produces, no cliffhanger, no nothing, just happily ever after. Well, as soon as I was done, the sales department started saying, "Well, now what's the next game? When's the next game coming out? Are you working on another game?" And And I was really thrown off because I kind of assumed there never would be another game. So instead of I struggled for a long time. I mean, like maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks, trying to figure out what to do to get around this. I called it painting myself into the corner. I couldn't get out, and I happened to go to Sierra's office and run into a woman in the hall that I hadn't seen for a while, and she said, "What are you working on now, Larry 4?" And I, like a smart ass, said, "Oh no, Larry 5. Yeah, of course I'm working on Larry 4." And suddenly I thought, well, wait a second, who says you've got to do them in order? Why don't I do Larry 5 next? And then all through Larry 5, I could make a joke out of what happened in Larry 4 that you remember, but no gamer ever will see. And so that was the way it was. I just had painted myself into a corner. I needed a way out, and I thought of skipping a sequel, and it turned out to be a brilliant idea for sales and marketing because for every time the salespeople said, well, now we've got this new game coming out, Leisure Suit Larry 5, and always the buyer would say, wait, well, I don't think I've played 4 yet. And then we get mind share, so you'd get in their heads that way. So it really, it was really, and plus it was just another quirk, a funny quirk that I thought would be a twist that nobody else had done.
Would you ever think about going back and doing a number 4?
Well, that would spoil the joke, wouldn't it?
maybe it could work in some levels.
The Lost Tales of Leisure Suit Larry.
I just think it's funny that not only did you skip it, you put stuff in the 5th one to make people like of the 4th that people were like, I don't remember any of that, but it was like saying like you should have remembered it. Amazing.
No, Larry recalled everything. Every time I had some sort of and it was a great device too, because anytime I needed some sort of plot device or something, I could just say, "Oh yeah, this happened to you in Larry 4, so you know about this" or something. It was
right, yeah.
It was a fun thing.
Very good idea.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was a stupid kid. I just basically was sitting there when I was playing the collection. I was like, "Oh, what happened to number 4? Did I miss something?"
Michael, if you were a kid, you shouldn't have been playing it.
Yeah, well,
I will say the guys in Retro and Lim did make a comment that Michael Burhan is Leisure Suit Larry.
No, I will say this, Al, you have shaped my life. Most of I am the literally.
I'm sorry.
I am the 30-something man who's literally has the most eccentric blue humor in the world. Kind of like Leisure Suit Larry. So, in terms of like your time in development and stuff, what made you want to remake the game?
Well, that's also a simple, practical answer. Replay Games obtained the rights from the current owner of the rights, Codemasters, and the only rights they got were for remaking the games. And so it seemed obvious that we had to do a remake, and so we thought we'd start with number 1 and do that first.
Okay, what was your take on the other Leisure Suit Larry games that were made afterwards? I believe your final one was Love for Sale, wasn't it?
Yeah, I stopped with Love for Sale. Well, actually, there was a Leisure Suit Larry's Casino game that came out, and foolishly, against my better judgment, I let Sierra talk me into hardwiring it so it would only work on the Sierra's network that it had going at that time. And then when they closed down that network after 2 years or so, suddenly the game stopped working online. So Leisure Suit Larry's Casino was an odd appendix to the series, but my last game, real adventure game, was Love for Sale. There were 2 games after that one was called Magna Cum Laude, and the other was called Box Office Bust. I had nothing to do with either one of those, and I'm proud to say that.
What's your opinion on those?
I'm proud to say that I had nothing to do with either one of them.
Reach the line.
Let's see. I guess the second game, the box office bust, was probably. How can I say this? The easiest way to describe it to people is to have them go to my website, go to allow.com and look under Larry, and there's a page there about box office bust, and it's nothing but quotes from reviews of the game, and they are absolutely hilarious. They're some of the nastiest, most horrible reviews you've ever read, and they're hilarious. It's one of the funniest pages on my site. Magna Cum Laude was a little different. It was a better game. Box Office Bust actually won Worst Game of the Year from several websites and magazines. It was a terrible game. It had really no redeeming features. But the Magna Cum Laude had some scenes in it that I thought were pretty damn funny, and I would have been proud to have written those scenes. But the game overall was just a horrible mishmash of adventure game plus mini games plus a real schizophrenic attitude on the writing. And I came to learn later that I think it was because they hired a couple of Hollywood comedy writers to write the story of the game, but then they were off the game for a year while the programmers added lots of other features and characters and interactions and things, and nobody ever called them back. And so they ended up with somebody else doing that whole set of interactions and text, and they were pretty universally horrible. So I remember I went out on right as the game started. I went out in the quadrangle or something on campus, and had Larry walk up to a girl, and he used some kind of funny pickup line that was bad. You know what would look good on you? Me, something like that. And,
I use that all the time. By the way,
he really does.
And well, it's not a bad setup, right? And the girl comes back and says, "Fuck off, cocksucker."
That's what I usually get all the time.
What?
That is the most true to life answer that they could have ever put in that game.
Yeah, but it ain't funny. That's the thing. They misinterpreted the games. They thought the games were about tits and ass, and I always thought the games were about humor and laughter. And their attitude towards it was, yeah, we'll just make this as dirty as possible. We'll make the girls' tits as big and balloony as possible, and that'll make a great game. And it didn't work for me. I don't know. Maybe there are people out there who love it, but
what made the games have that charm is it had that charm as like some of those old school teenage movies like Porky's and stuff like that. I mean, that's what I gathered when I played it.
That's my period. I'm an old guy. That's maybe that's has something to do with that.
I mean, I guess say Pee-wee being Larry. Totally.
Ooh. Well, maybe, yeah.
I think in a way as well, though, that's kind of the culture that we had back then. You had like Revenge of the Nerds, you had Porky's, to a certain extent, where the humor was really blue, very dry, and like in a certain vein, similar to Animal House, where
all those movies you've mentioned are favorites of mine.
Mine too.
Yeah, so it's not surprising that my games ended up being like those, because that's the stuff I like.
But that's why I find myself in awe of you in a sense, because you've had this type of sort of very blue, very direct type of humor. You've brought it out in this character, and it does show it. It shows that type. It shows it's very humorous. It's very funny. It's one of those things where you take it as well as sort of tongue in cheek. And I think with the later Larry games, the ones that you didn't really have anything to do with, they missed the boat totally on that, because they thought, okay, let's just do it. Let's just have a comment about ass and tits and stuff, and that will exactly is what people want to see, and that's kind of what drew people away from it, because it just got to the point where it was even overbearing. I've got a copy of Box Office Bust. I managed to buy it in a pound bin somewhere, and with that game, I found it extremely hard to play, and it wasn't because it was hard to play. It was just overbearing in terms of its overtones, because like they put Larry in this situation where he's like a porn director now. He owns a porn company that's the size of Paramount Pictures, and the protagonist in this is his nephew, and it all just doesn't seem like a Larry game. It's like someone put their hands in it and thought, oh, we can make a Leisure Suit Larry game, and didn't understand where the heck it was going.
Yeah.
So let's ask you, what video games influenced you growing up?
Oh, well, Sierra games were my start. The first few games I bought were from Sierra, and I ended up playing a lot of those games. So I was an adventure game guy. I had a few other games as well. I remember I was totally addicted to a game called Snakebite, Byte. That played on the Apple II back in, when was that, 82, maybe 81, probably 81, something, maybe 80, I don't know, a long time ago. But yeah, no, I was a Sierra fan. So when I created some games, they ended up looking like Sierra games. And I still remember vividly the first time I met Ken Williams. He and Roberta came walking up the aisle at Apple Fest in San Francisco in 1982, and his first words were, "Hey, Berta, come look at this. These look just like your games." To me, that was really high praise. I was very proud because those were the games that I loved. So that was my starting influence, certainly with those. I loved the Lucas games as well, and Steve Moretsky and Infocom. I played the Infocom games, and but I was more of an adventure game kind of guy. I was never that good at Twitch games, and I never got into the RPGs either. I don't know. It didn't appeal to me, but yeah. So adventure games, I would say.
So, what do you think about gaming culture now? Do you stay in touch with it?
I don't think about it much, to be honest with you. I retired 15 years ago, so I kind of got away from it. I just developed other interests. I do other things, and I don't do as much gaming as I did. I still like to play comedy games, but those are pretty few and far between. So, yeah, I think it's been a while. Now I play casual games on my phone. I'm stuck on that damn Candy Crush. but no, as far as playing, big titles or console games, no, I don't.
Okay, let me ask you another little quick question. In terms of sort of like the influence that Larry had, do you ever think that the game would have been this big?
Well, absolutely not. We created games with the idea that they would last a year or two, and because we were in the early days of the PC, of DOS-based games, our games lasted longer than most games. We had games that continued to sell for a few years. But frankly, at the time, we were knocking them out pretty fast, and there was really no belief whatsoever that anybody would be playing these games after a year or two. It was always a surprise to me that Larry lasted as long as it did, because when it first sold, it had terrible sales. The game was the worst-selling title in the history of the company, and I think that's primarily because the salespeople were afraid of it. They thought it was dirtier than it was. The box was always the dirtiest part of the game, and and if you look at the box, you'd go, "Oh my God, this is really hot," and then you get inside, and of course you would just look in vain for a lot of that dirt, but we did make you laugh, and that was the whole point of it all. But the fact that the first game sold 4,000 copies in the first month, at a time when a typical game shipped 50,000 copies, that gives you an idea of how little interest there was in it. But we really kind of We kind of invented viral marketing. We didn't call it that then, but because so many people pirated the game and gave it away to their friends and stuff, the game really picked up a life of its own, and it continued to grow and sell more copies every month. And the word spread strictly through word of mouth. It wasn't until Larry 5 that Sierra spent a cent on sales or advertising or marketing of any kind for the games. They literally just threw the games out at the shelf, and they stuck.
Very, very true. Has anyone else got a question?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go for it, John.
Based on some of the storylines and situations that Larry finds himself in, did you draw any your lifetime your own life experiences into that, or is it just totally from your imagination?
Well, I think any writer who has to come up with situations and dialogue will throw his life into it, because part of writing those games was meeting a deadline. It wasn't like this was something that I could have a long period of time and to sit back and contemplate and work on casually in the evenings or something. No, it was really a push and to get the games done, and so I would throw everything I had at the game. So yeah, I wouldn't say that all those experiences happened to me, but they certainly I heard of most of them are happening to somebody somewhere. But I mean, a few things I did create completely from whole cloth, but for the most part, it was yeah, absolutely life experience.
And what about some of the characters? Is that kind of based on people you've known?
Of course.
Without naming names.
No, absolutely. There was yeah, that's what you have to do. And I mean, sometimes I could create a character that I hadn't experienced, like in Larry 6. I thought it would be funny if he dated a transvestite, and I know nobody believes me, but at least 3 or 4 months before the Crying Game came out, I wrote that scene with Larry out on the beach, with the girl who actually is a guy, and then when Crying Game came out, it was like, oh shit, nobody will believe that I came up with this idea first. They are just going to think I copied that movie. But that's the way it goes. You do have to take your lumps.
I think one of the funniest bits of the game that I remember was in Leisure Suit Larry 1, the first one, when you're making that phone call, the little phone box outside the mini-mart.
Yeah.
There's a bit where you phone a sex line or something.
Yes.
I remember that. I remember the first time I played that, I was in absolute stitches. I was crying with laughter the first time I played that. It was so funny.
Well, that came about because there was a game out when I was a child called Mad Libs, and you would write, and they had paragraphs or a short story with blanks, and then under the blank there would be it would say put an adjective here, insert an adverb here, and you would ask somebody who couldn't see the story to name a body part or to name a vegetable or something, and then when you got done, they would read it back, and it would be a crazy, surreal kind of story. Well, that's where I got the idea for that.
Awesome.
Zach, you got another question?
Yeah, I want to know which one are you like most proud that you've made? Which is your favorite one that you've put out?
I thought Love for Sale was the best of the bunch, and partly because you have to understand that none of us knew what we were doing back then. We were making this whole thing up as we went along. There were no books on game design or game programming or game writing. There was nothing like that. There was no classes you could take, certainly no college major. we had no idea what the hell we were doing. We just knew that we loved playing these games, and that we thought we could do something like these other games, and so that's how the whole thing came about. So I always was learning. I was always trying to figure out what it is, and my big fear was that at some point people would realize I had no idea what the hell I was doing, and they would say, "Well, yeah, we're going to find somebody who knows something about this, and you're fired." But by the time I got to Larry 7, it was like, hey, I think I got a handle on this now. I think I can do this. And I had pretty much confidence. And then, sadly, that was the last adventure game I wrote. And so it was like, damn, I just learned how to do this, and now there's no market for it.
I think adventure games are definitely my favourite genre, and they should still do more of them. It's just a shame that you don't get as much.
There's a piece on my website that I wrote years back, shortly after I retired, I guess, that talked about the death of adventure games, and my premise was that I think adventure games were the perfect game for the 80s, because if you were using a PC back then, you had to be a puzzle solver, and you had to be a good typist. You didn't have a choice. Most people didn't have a mouse to control their computer. They certainly didn't have a GUI interface. They typed command lines, and if they typed one letter wrong, it didn't work. And so they were used to that kind of environment that we asked them to do in the game. And also, if you got your computer to work, you had to be able to go into the config.sys and edit your autoexec.bat file and do all these esoteric things. I remember fighting tooth and nail trying to get HiMem to work properly with Seventh Guest or something. Those kinds of experiences, and that's the kind of people that will enjoy adventure games. People that the vast majority of people don't really care to solve puzzles. They'd rather, do something else. And so I think that's one reason why adventure games kind of, I don't know that they faded away. I think that the other genres of gaming just grew and grew and grew, whereas adventure games didn't. I think there's probably about as many adventure game players now as there were in the 80s. It's just the other genres have grown tremendously.
There's a great RPG adventure game that I think you should try out, which is on the iPhone and Android apps. It's called Knights of Pen and Paper, and it really brings me back to the old time of adventure games.
Yeah?
In a sense. Yeah, okay. Give it a shot. It's a great, great game. It's funny, it's extremely addictive, and I've even been caught a couple of times when I was in my SIA classes playing with this game and not paying attention.
Well, good. All right, I'll give it a try.
Speaking of funny and not paying attention, we have Brandon Ligon here with us today. Brandon, how are you?
From the future, how do I sound on my brand new Xbox One via the Skype app?
You sound horrible.
Shameless self-promotion.
You sound terrible.
Have you got a question for Al Lowe here?
Have you got a separate mic you could put near your mouth? That's the question.
How about this? If I speak directly into this Connect right now, I'm like...
Yeah. See, that sounds great.
Okay.
That's better.
All right. Well, Al,
liked it a lot,
thanks for coming on IGG. You're by far the most reputable person that's ever graced us with his presence.
Well, we all make mistakes.
Yeah, right. Well, what do you think about a studio like Telltale Games that's really like leading the way in episodic content? Do you think that's outside of the big studio house? Do you think that's the way of the future for like an indie developer to do, to get a title out there, just to release episodic content?
I hope it is. I think that I applaud them for what they're doing, and I love what they've done. And I hope that that's a good answer for the future. It's I think it's a great thing. They took a big risk, and I hope that everybody rewards them for it.
Awesome. They are. They're the only company that's made a good Walking Dead game.
Yeah, really.
I'm hoping they're the only company that makes a good Game of Thrones game.
Yeah.
Yeah, John, you were going to say something?
I was going to say I quite liked the other Walking Dead game, but I like bad games, so.
That's the start. That's probably the one thing that you need to get into the video game industry. You have to like bad games.
Yes. I also like good ones.
So Al, tell us a little bit more about your stand-up comedy.
Well, I've never done it.
Okay, so that's out of the window.
Awkward segue.
Very awkward segue.
But on a similar note, I am a collector of jokes. So over the past 15 years, I've sent out 7,000 jokes to a huge mailing list of thousands of people. If you go to allowe.com, you can sign up, and every weekday morning, I'll send you 2 jokes, one of which is clean, and the price is $0. Just go and sign up, and it's all free. I just do it out of the love for humor. I mean, it's just for fun for me. It's over the years, I've never duplicated a joke, or at least tried never to. I'm sure I have at some point, but yeah, it's I call it Cyber Joke 3000, and every weekday you get 2 jokes in your email.
Do you think humor is really something that's going away in gaming? Like, there's really not a lot of over the top slapsticky kind of games anymore.
There never were a lot.
I mean, not to say a lot, but now there's definitely. I
Less.
can't even think of the last really over. I was thinking like a title like Gex from the mid to late '90s on the PlayStation. Like games like that, satirical games. That's what I want to see more.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, Scott Murphy and Mark Crow are working on Space Venture, and I suspect it'll be hilarious. If you haven't been to the Space Venture website, those 2 are the guys who created the Space Quest games for Sierra. They had a Kickstarter shortly after we did, and they haven't finished theirs yet, but they're working on it. And if you want a funny game, I would bet money that game is going to be hilarious.
Do you point at them and laugh most of the time and say, "Ha ha, mine was finished before yours"?
Yeah, well, it was a different set of circumstances. They raised a little less money, and they were creating a new game from scratch, whereas we had a good game design to start with. We didn't have any code or art or music or text or anything else, but we at least knew where we were going when we started. And it was odd. All the archives that you would think that we're preserving our digital heritage were all thrown in the dumpster when Sierra went into its death spiral. So none of that artwork, none of the drawings, the backgrounds, the discs, the music, any of that stuff, all of it's gone. A few of the guys that worked there took copies home of things. I had backups of my source code and original things, but because of the way that we built the games, it's almost impossible to rebuild them now without the set of tools that we used on the exact day that those games shipped. So we basically started from scratch and just got a copy of Larry, and we used the VGA version instead of the AGA version, but we got a copy of the VGA game and just started walking through it and writing down all the things that we wanted to include. Yeah, we reverse engineered my own game, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I was going to ask too. I mean, of course, you brought back Leisure Suit Larry, but if there was a series that you helped work on that you could bring back, what would it be?
Well, I loved Freddy Farkas. I think it was a funny Western, and that's both of those are genres that are scarce today. But I think the real game that I enjoyed doing the most and would love to bring back was Torrance Passage, which was a King's Quest kind of game that I got inspired by Mrs. Doubtfire of all things. I took my daughter to a movie theater, and we saw Mrs. Doubtfire, and during the course of the film, I realized that there were two pitches of laughter, that when Robin Williams would do something slapstick and silly, that you'd hear all these little kid voices laughing, and then when he'd do some really filthy double entendre or something that went right over the kids' heads, you'd hear all the adults go, and it was just funny. I was sitting there listening to it. It was like, man, why aren't there games like this? Why isn't there a game there where a kid and an adult could play together and, both laugh at different parts? And so that's what I set out to do with Torrance Passage. I wanted to do a game that an adult could play with a kid, and both of them have a good time. And I think I succeeded. I mean, I've heard a lot of people who have played the game like that and said that they enjoyed it. And I did it primarily because my daughter was 10 years old at the time, and she had never played one of my games because I had been doing Larry and other kind of adult games till then, and so yeah, it was really meant for me to play with Megan.
It's really funny. I mean, it really takes a certain kind of style to develop that sense of humor, to have that double-edged sword for the adults and the kids. I mean, it's kind of hard to do that.
It was difficult, and I really wanted to build a game that would support sequels, and to that extent, I've mapped out an entire at least 5 games where you would take this guy through his coming of age in the first game, and then his rise to power in the second game, and his challenges to the throne in the third game, and so forth, and then finally in the last game, I wanted him to die, which you don't see much in games. You rarely kill off the hero. So
definitely,
but was not to be.
I have a question. Is there anything in any of your games that you wish you hadn't put into them?
Well, there's a lot of bad puzzles, a lot of things that I thought were pretty obvious that obviously that evidently turned to not be obvious to others. For example, where I lived in California, snails were a common pest in the garden. And everybody I knew, you put out a tray full of beer, and the snails would get in the beer and get good and drunk, and then you'd throw them into a paper sack filled with cornmeal and leave them in there for a few days until they shit out all the stuff that was in there and then inside them, and then you'd pop them in the oven and broil them, eat them. Escargot, except then they call it escargot. They don't call them snails, but we call them snails anyway. So I figured, using beer to stop snails was an obvious puzzle. Turned out that not so. Many people had no idea how did I come up with such a crazy idea. So yeah, that's one, but there were a lot of others. As I said, we didn't really know what we were doing. We just did the best we could.
Right. Was there anything that you you almost like you had to put in that somebody else was like saying like make sure you put this in, or you were always up to your own things for your games? No.
Sierra had enough problems. Ken was busy enough doing other things that he didn't really worry about me. He trusted me after the first few years. I proved my salt, and earned his trust, and I think after that it was pretty much do what you want to do. You can do it.
Okay.
Did he make you sit in a corner, Al? Did you just go in the corner and do what you want?
Well, here again, you talk about using your own life experiences. In Larry 2, in Larry 2. Larry lands on this desert island, and he meets the native girl, and he asks for her hand in marriage of the chief, and the chief is Kenny Wawa, which was Ken Williams again. It was not for nothing that the chief of the tribe makes Larry learn to write an operating system in assembly language or something, and to prove his manhood. Because when I first started at Sierra, I wrote games in AppleSoft Basic. That's what I knew how to program. And Ken said, no real programmer writes in Basic. You've got to learn assembly language. So I taught myself assembler and wrote games in assembler for a couple of years then, until C came out. And then once C was out, we kind of switched over to C. But yeah, so it was no joke. I literally took that out of Ken Williams making me learn assembly language so I could write games.
But that must be like a task to do, and to know that you've actually like switched the way that you write games and the way you program games is
I
very...
didn't program 2 games in a row on the same computer or the same operating system until, maybe like 10 games in, something like that. Every game I did, I learned either a new operating system or a new language or a new computer hardware, or all of the above.
Wow.
Yeah, it was
it shows how diverse you are. Let me ask you a little personal question. What do you think of the comedy of Seth MacFarlane?
Oh, I love it.
Yeah, I sort of see him as one of those guys who probably grew up watching, like playing the games that you made, because his comedy is in the same style of humor in a sense.
Well, or we had some of the same influences because, I love his stuff.
Well, the same doctor.
And it turns out he's a real jazz guy too, which I am.
Awesome. See, great minds think alike. So, Retro Unlim's got a question for you. He said, Larry's surname, was that based on someone that you knew? And where did the character come from?
The character came from a guy, a traveling salesman for Sierra, who went around selling software, and of course that was Larry's job. He was a traveling software salesman, which I thought was a funny idea for a job. Anyway, back then there were so few people that did that job that it seemed like an odd, I think. Plus, it was a game and software. It seemed like something a guy at a game would do. But we had a guy who worked at Sierra who, when he would go back from the road, he would love to come into the programming area and tell all of us about all the women he'd laid on the trip. And so it was like, we don't really want to know this. We're stuck here in front of these goddamn monitors 20 hours a day. We don't want to hear about you getting laid. And so that was, I think when I thought about Larry, I thought that would be the guy I'd model him on. But the name itself came about from the Leisure Suit word. I just thought Leisure Suit and Larry seemed to have a flow to it. So I used Larry for his name. And then he didn't have a last name until just before we shipped the game. And I thought, he probably should have a last name, and I don't know what it is. So since we had Larry and Leisure and Lounge Lizard and Land and, 5 L's in the title, I thought, well, his last name might as well be an L word too. So I went to my, hey, here's something that's dating me, kids. I went to my Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume L. Yeah, nobody knows what those are. Anyway, and I happened to start at the front of the book and started paging through, and one of the first pictures I saw was a guy named Arthur B. Laffer, who, back in the Reagan era, invented the concept of trickle-down economics, where, we treat the rich really well, and eventually some of their money will dribble down to the poor people. Remember that idea? How'd that work out? Anyway, he invented that concept, but I thought, what better name for a comedy character than Laffer? And so that's how he came up. But literally, it was because of him. And oddly enough, the weirdest twist of fate, when we did the Laffer utilities, one of the guys in marketing, I'm sure it was John Williams because he was pretty much the whole department then. That was Ken's younger brother. John Williams was a brilliant marketer, I thought. Anyway, he came up with the idea of contacting Arthur B. Laffer to put a quote on the box that says, something the Laffer utilities will ruin productivity in America, or I don't know, some kind of line like that. And so we called Arthur Laffer's office. Now, this is so weird because I just pulled this name out of the encyclopedia, literally. And they found his office, and they called, and his secretary answered, and gave him the message, and he said, well, what the hell is a video game? Why would I do this? And she says, oh, no, my son's played that game, and he loves it. He says it's really great. You should talk to these people. And he ended up coming up to Oakhurst and visiting us. I drove him around for a day in my car and showed him everything around the company and stuff, and he ended up taking an investment position with Sierra. Odd, isn't it, how all that stuff comes about? So.
Yeah, it's really weird. It's weird how things work out like that.
Yeah, it was strange.
By the way, we have a member of our show team who's not here today who wanted to pay his respects to you, of course, and say how much he loves you, and that's Travis Goss. Travis, hope you're having a great time today, mate, and, I've told him. Another question from Retro Unlim. He said, in terms of... I'm trying to find the question. I should have found it first. Silly me. Right, in terms of the name of the bar, where did that come from?
Lefties?
Yes. I'm just reading this question out, but
I don't remember thinking it up. I have a feeling that Mark Crow just slapped that on the graphic when he drew it. I don't really remember. It's a great question. I should ask Mark sometime and see if he remembers that. But I think maybe Mark might have come up with it, or it could have been from Chuck Benton's original game, but I doubt it because, as I recall, I only kept one sentence out of Chuck's text. It was Soft Porn was an odd game, which, by the way, you can download Soft Porn from my website too, if you want to see what a really hard game is like.
I've played it.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's not a lot of clues. You have to.
He doesn't mean actual soft porn, ladies and gentlemen. Just
yeah,
so know
that's
the
title of a product. Yeah, that's a product title. But you can. I think it might have been in Chuck's game, but I don't know. I would suspect Mark came up with that.
We should have a sequel and just call it Hardcore Porn.
Oh, I don't know.
I think there's plenty of that everywhere.
Take your safe search off Google.
Yeah.
Can I ask another one?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. In the first game, when Larry has sex with the prostitute in the hotel room, but he forgets to wear the condom and he dies, were you asked to put that in there to promote safe sex, or is it just something that you put in yourself?
Well, no, that was my idea. You were supposed to die. You needed some way to die when you did things wrong back then. We didn't have the budgets to create graphics to do everything, so we just killed you when you made a mistake. It was far cheaper. So so I that was a dead end. A mistake. But I thought that it would be funny to have your crotch go radioactive or whatever it was, and Mark didn't have time to do that graphic. So one day I took the Larry character and just kind of hollowed out his groin area and made it transparent, and put some colors around it so it kind of glowed a little bit, and created that graphic at the end. So I just thought it was funny.
I just thought maybe you had been asked to put that in there to encourage people to have safe sex.
Nobody asked me to put anything in particularly. They just said, how soon will it be done so we can ship it and make money?
Fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way it worked. You had to be efficient. and you had to be productive, I guess is the right word. So it was always a deadline-driven business. It seems obvious now that the games would be successful, but we've put out a lot of games that didn't sell, and some of the other games had to make up for those, including Larry. I mean, when Larry shipped, it didn't sell well at all. So, now in hindsight, it looks obvious that would be a great idea. But at the time, I really thought that I had wasted 6 months of my life.
All right.
Yeah, it's something that it's kind of gone with gaming now. Like, when games come out, you can definitely tell when the companies are kind of like telling the developers like what to do. It's kind of cool hearing the fact that, they were like, we trust you with this product and just put it out, have complete
we were
control.
Kind of indie developers, except we had a big publisher behind us. When Sierra was huge, I don't know, people nowadays don't remember, but when I first started with Sierra in '82, they were the biggest advertiser of any of the game companies, and they had the most products for the most varieties of machines. When Ken was removed from leadership at the company, he was the victim of a hostile takeover by some guys who are now in federal penitentiary for lying and stealing and cheating. But anyway, when Ken lost control of the company, it was very successful. That time, Sierra had 28% market share. 28 cents out of every dollar spent on entertainment software went to Sierra. That's huge, man. No, even EA isn't that big. So
there's actually a really funny story that I want you to tell in the podcast about how you technically got fired, but not really.
Well, yeah, that's true. When I started at Sierra, I was hired as a game designer, and I worked there for 6 months or so, until the company hit some really hard times. I came in as employee 20, and in that 6 or 8 months, we grew from 20 employees to 120 employees. Sadly, that Christmas was real tough. The games, we had good games, but they focused on the Atari 2600 marketplace because some people who weren't involved in creating games, but instead were the money guys from Wall Street. They told us, you need to back the 2600 because that's what everybody's doing. And, it's that typical same stupid follow the herd mentality, which means you're always in the back eating dust. That's the wrong way to go about it. But Ken took their money, and so he said, well, maybe I better do what they say. And so he produced a lot of Atari 2600 cartridges that didn't sell because every kid I knew wanted E.T. for the 2600, and then it turned out to be one of the worst games in history. But by then the damage was done, and our games hadn't sold. So that spring, all those games started coming back in droves, and it was a really difficult time for Sierra. They couldn't make payroll. It looked like the company was going to go under. So one Friday morning, when the company had 120 employees, Ken called everybody in and made all the programmers, at least, an offer and said, if you'll go home and work on advances against future royalties, then I can pay you the same amount of money I've been paying you, but it'll look like a prepaid asset on the books, whereas now you're an expense and you just come straight off the profitability. If I pay you in future royalties, advances against future royalties, then you'll be a prepaid asset. So he told me this story, and I said, well, like, what are we talking about here? Because I'm thinking, I'm going to get screwed. So I said, well, what about this? You want me to do that game? Yeah, I want you to do that. How about this? Yeah, I want you to do that. Well, what about porting this game to the COM64? Yeah, I want you to port this game. Blah, blah. So by the time we're done, how much advances we got? Well, how much for this? Okay, how about for that? All right. Yeah. Well, when I added it all up, it was like I was going to get twice as much money and pretty much be on my own. And I said, well, okay, that sounds great to me. And I shook his hand and I said, have I just been fired? And he said, yep. And I said, hey, great. Okay, thanks. and walked out. And for the next 15 years, I was never a Sierra employee. I was always an outside contractor who worked on a game-to-game basis with Sierra. Produced all those games and stuff, but I never was a Sierra employee, whereas all the other developers around Sierra were.
Did you have any involvement in the Police Quest series at all?
Well, after 13 months, Police Quest was still in terrible shape. And you got to remember, I had just done Larry in about 4 months and then a month or so of beta testing. And this other guy had been working 13 months on Police Quest. So when I finished Larry and the sales sucked, the guy said, hey, can you bail out this other guy? And I said, well, sure, I'll do whatever I can. So I went over to work on Police Quest with Jim Walls, and it was in pretty dire shape. If you knew exactly what it was you were supposed to do in the game, you could go through it and do those things, and it would work. But Jim had never written an adventure game, and he didn't realize that you have to have alternatives, and you have to have clues and some other sorts of context that tells you what it is you can do. And so for 4 months, I think, he and I worked pretty much around the clock. And I would just say, well, Jim, what happens if I don't do that? Oh, well, what could you... I said, I don't know. What could you do this? Yeah, all right, let's do that. So then I'd code that. And then we'd get to the next place, and it would be, you have to do this specific thing, that meets the police manual. I said, but what if you don't do that? Well, here's what had happened. So I went through and did all the if not statements and on Police Quest 1. And that was a lot of fun. Jim was a fun guy to work with. He, like most cops, he had a hell of a lot of life experiences, and he had a lot of great stories. And we kept each other entertained.
Yeah, I love that game as well. It's an absolute classic. All three of them. Well, 4. There was 4, wasn't there?
I've got a question from one of our regular hosts, Miguel. He asks, have you thought about having a character from one of Leisure Suit Larry games make it onto an issue of Playboy? I suppose you think he's probably saying one of the women, I
think he's asking the wrong person. I was thrilled when Playboy mentioned Larry. We actually got in Playboy and Penthouse and a lot of other magazines, big name magazines, back when that wasn't an oxymoron. So that was thrilling for me. In fact, somewhere I have a copy of Penthouse where Larry was one of the games recommended for Christmas or something, a Christmas gift for your buddies or something. So that would be neat. And I'm looking on my wall here. I have a photo from Rolling Stone magazine when they took a picture of me, and this is before Photoshop. They actually had cardboard cutouts made of Larry and Patty, and life-size ones, and so I've got a picture of me standing with an arm around Larry and an arm around Patty, and that was in Rolling Stone for an article. So that was fun, but yeah.
And another question here from Retro Unlim. He wants to know what your favorite TV show is.
Currently?
It could be currently, or it could be prior.
History. Well, let's say currently. I really like the humor on Modern Family. I think it's of a level that it functions on more than one level, which is always difficult. So I enjoy that. We watch Homeland and some of those kind of soap opera shows. Comedy shows, I don't do much with the regular sitcoms because, it's like once I learned how to write comedy, I kind of got uninterested in the standard sort of comedy fare. But I love a show on, I think it's on IFC, independent film channel, called Inside Comedy, where David Steinberg interviews various comedians. That's always an interesting show. And what else? I'm trying to think of what else is on my TiVo. Right now, I've got a lot of Olympics on.
Do you like the stretching, Al? Is that the reason why you have the Olympics on?
In fact, yes.
I've got another question from a gentleman by the name of Rude.
I'm going to have to wrap up here at 6:30. So.
No worries. We'll quickly ask you a couple more questions and then finish off the show. Rudy J. Ferretti says, "What's your favorite Nintendo game?"
Oh my God! We got hooked on Nintendo when it was Famicom. Does anybody remember those?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, like in '83 or '84, one of our guys went to Japan, and he saw this machine over there, and it was this family computer, which it really had nothing to do with a computer or a family. I mean, it had a computer inside it, I guess, but he brought this thing back, and we had a guy at Sierra who was an electronics genius named Bob Heitman, and he figured out how to change the guts of that Japanese machine to run it at 60 hertz instead of 50, and to run NTSC instead of PAL, and what else? Something else. Anyway, we ended up being able to hook it up to our system, and we played Mario incessantly, and just thought it was a great game. But you got to understand, that was shortly after the big firing, that Black Friday when the company went from 120 to 40, and Ken looked at cartridge games and just said, "No way, I lost my ass, and I'm not going to risk losing the company again." And so we chose not to do Nintendo titles because of that. And so I don't think the company did cartridge games until Ken was gone.
And last but not least, Al, I've got one more from you, and it's just from Dave Wade, aka Lawn Boy 1975, on Retro Unlim. He says, "Have modern games lost their sense of humor? And do they take themselves too seriously?"
I think so. I haven't. I would love to have people prove me wrong. Send me a link to a game that will actually make me laugh, and I'd be very appreciative. It's difficult to find. So I would have to say yes. I think they have, but I hope it's a trend that's going to end soon. I think that. Space Venture is going to be a good game, and I think the Ron Gilbert's game with Tim Schafer, is supposed to be good. So, hope so.
Speaking of Tim Schafer, I was going to say Psychonauts is a game that made me laugh the hardest of any game I've ever played in my life. My favorite part of that game was a kid who squirrels tell him what to do, and he burns people's houses down because of that, and it's amazing. And I lost. Yeah,
I love that game. But it was a real cause of grief for me, and I don't know that anybody knows this, but when in 2005 I started a development company to create an action comedy game. And we developed a design called Sam Swade Undercover Exposure, which I thought was going to be an action comedy, and it was a different from Larry, but it had a little of my sense of humor in it. It had a little risque stuff, but it was much more of an action game than an adventure game. So when we took it around to publishers to look for money for development, we developed a good working demo. We had a level completely finished, and we had another level about half done, and we had the engine built. You know, it looked like we were well on our way. But when we took it around to publishers to seek money to finish development, we got killed by Psychonauts, because they would all say, well, what kind of game is it? Well, I'd say it's an action comedy, and and they say, well, what games is it like? And what are your comparables? And I would say, well, we really don't have any comparables. You know, it's a realistic setting. It's modern day times. It's about a young kind of studly guy who's a detective wannabe, and he ends up falling into this situation where he ends up solving a mystery, and there's not really a game like it. And so they would say, well, what about Psychonauts? That's an action comedy. And I said, well, yeah, that's like it, but, it's got a very odd graphic style. It looks like it's for children. The characters all have heads shaped like American footballs instead of football, soccer footballs. It's an odd game. It's very adult. It wasn't dirty, but it was certainly geared for adult humor. And they would say, well, we think it's most like Psychonauts. So how well did Psychonauts sell? And it didn't sell well at all. And so all the companies then, that was their comparison to my design, my project. And so they said, well, we're not going to publish any game because there's no other game like it. And that sold well. So, yeah, it was odd that, one of the guys that I love the most, Tim Schafer, ended up doing a game that I loved a lot. And then it was used as a wedge against us when we tried to produce a game of our own. So I just turn around.
Sorry, just one more from Retro Anime. Just says, how would you like to be remembered?
Oh, I think as somebody who made people laugh. I think that's the easy answer. I've always enjoyed making people laugh, and that was the whole point of my games. So. I think that's the simple, short answer.
And you succeeded?
Well, I hope so.
I think so.
Yeah, I do too. You've, as I said, you've impacted a lot of us in more ways than one. And I have to admit, Al, it's been such a pleasure having you and I got gameplay. This, for me, has been a dream come true. I sound like a bit of a blabbering little teen, basically being on the show today, trying to sort of talk to you and kind of cover up my cock-ups as well at the same time. But it's been amazing. Is there anything that you want to promote today in regards to what you're doing at the moment, what you're working on, or if there's anything that you plans for the future?
I have a website called allow.com, and it's full of humor. If you like my kind of stuff, there's a lot that'll keep you busy there. There's hundreds of things to laugh at, and a lot of just things that I enjoy, and I'm sharing them with everybody else. You can download everything for free. It's all wide open. I even have a joke database where I've got 6,000 jokes that I've sent out over the years. You can go to it and do a regular Google search on the entire database. So if you want, lawyer jokes or blonde jokes or musician jokes or whatever, it's literally like a Google search thing, and you put in what you want and you get back all these jokes from it. So I would say go there and then sign up for my daily joke email. It's well worth the price you pay for it.
Lovely. And now we'll just go into the plugs from the rest of our hosts quickly before we sign off. So Brandon, have you got anything that you want to promote quickly?
Yeah, you can listen to my show every Wednesdays on Dream Elite Radio, Sportaholics Anonymous, where I, bullshit, party and bullshit. Talk some sports, shoot the shit, all that kind of good stuff. 8 o'clock Wednesdays, Dream Elite Radio, blogtalkradio.com/Dream Elite. And, I think that's it for me. Yeah.
John?
Just Desert Island Games. Listen to Desert Island Games every Monday at 9 on the Retro Online Network.
Zach?
Yeah, you guys can catch me on youtube.com/gettingyouernerdon and check out our videos, and yeah, cool.
Zada?
All right. You guys can check out my podcast, Excess Gaming Podcast, on Podomatic.com or on iTunes. Our last episode we had was with Michael Burhan and Jason Heine from the All Gen Gamers podcast, and that was a really good episode. Also, you can check me out on YouTube.com. That's youtube.com/XanderScullion. And you can also check out all the content I just mentioned on the Retro Unlim network. That's retrounlim.com.
And ladies and gents, if you don't subscribe to anything of our Lowe's, you are just one big I'm adding that in there for you. And as always, ladies and gents, you can catch me on youtube.com/TheNerdGenius, nerdgenius.com if you want to check out anything from Getting Your Nerd On, the Excess Gaming Podcast, and also the Retro Unlim Network, which hosts this show, of course, and deals with everything. I would love to say to Al Lowe, thank you for being on this show. You've been a great special guest today, Al. You've been very humorous. We've loved having you on, and you made Michael Burhan nearly piss his pants.
You made him out of breath at one point.
That wasn't one of my goals, but I enjoy the fact that it happened. Hey, take care, guys. It's been a fun evening for me, too. Good night.
And ladies and gentlemen, just so you know, from Al Lowe, John Latimer, Brandon Liggins, Zach Latour, myself, Michael Burhan, and someone posing to be Michael Burhan, Xander Scullion, just remember that we've got gameplay. Have you?